Competition in the Android market is heating up, and we finally have a release from a major company with the Logitech G Cloud. This is marketed as a streaming device, but it is a fairly capable emulation handheld with a few interesting features. So let's go over the controls on the Logitech G Cloud. The first and most impactful thing for us, since we do have a streaming handheld, is that we have two big Alps joysticks because there aren't that many Android devices on the market today that have these bigger joysticks, and these two are quite good. They have a yellow accent on them along with this Logitech G button here, and there are a few other places that also have this accent, but for the most part, this device is just white and black. We have oddly placed start and select buttons at the top of the controller, and this is not that big of a problem for me, but I have had times where the right button gets stuck under the shell. Regarding the right side face buttons, I would say that these are a tad too soft for my liking. If I had to put a number on it, I would say that these are about 75% as stiff as they should be based on other handhelds. The D-pad is decently sized, but it has a slight divot in the center and requires more pressure for input than the other buttons do. These are both using conductive rubber pads, and the mismatch in pressure required for input is a bit awkward, to say the least. I think somewhere in the middle of the stiffness for both of these is the perfect ideal standard. On the bottom of the device, you have a home button and a Logitech G button. On the left and the right side of the screen, we seem to have two microphones for voice support. In case anyone is wondering, our face buttons come in at around 8.3 millimeters and our D-pad comes in at around 24.5 millimeters. So the face buttons are slightly smaller than they are on the Steam Deck, but the D-pad is about 3 millimeters larger. On the top of the cloud, we have a set of stacked shoulder buttons. The L1 and R1 buttons are using micro switches for input, but the L2 and R2 buttons are fully analog, and that is not something that is common on Android handhelds at this point. When it comes to the analog buttons themselves, this took a little while to get used to, and I still don't quite feel like I'm that used to them. I would have liked for this to be just a bit extended out to here because this is kind of a shallow width for an analog button on a device that is this large. I don't mind the travel length being as short as it is, but it just feels kind of strange that this didn't extend out further than it does. The way it is now, I always feel like my finger is hanging off the edge, and this would have only made sense if their goal was to keep the total thickness of the device down, but the device is quite thick when you get to the grip area. In my opinion, they should have extended this top portion out a bit more to get you something larger to rest your fingers on, and it would have helped this device lay in a neutral position when it is on a table or a flat surface. As it is right now, the device will tilt backwards when it's on a flat surface, and it is extremely awkward. The input mechanism itself isn't that bad, but it does require a bit of extra force compared to something like an Xbox controller. I am willing to let that slide because it is an analog trigger, and they are so rare on Android handhelds at this point. Outside of that, the top holds our volume keys and this cool power button slider here that can lock the device or wake it up, as you can see right there. We also have an SD card tray. This can accept SD cards, but it doesn't support exFAT file systems. This is a big disappointment given that this thing only has 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and many games that you'll want to play on this will be larger than 4 gigabytes in size. The bottom of the device holds our two speakers, and I was quite surprised at the volume that these things were able to pump out. It's definitely a lot louder than comparable products, and the sound quality itself is actually quite good. You also have a 3.5mm headphone jack in the center, along with a Type-C port. The big thing to point out here is that this cannot support any video out functionality. This is purely for data transfer and charging, and it is a missed opportunity to say the least, given that there are many cheaper handhelds on the market that do have some form of video out support. The back of the device is simple, which is what I like. It doesn't have any visible screws. The side panel here might seem like it would be made with a rubber material, but this is in fact just plastic like the rest, and it just gives a bit of extra grip on the cloud. Now, some people are concerned about this D-pad for retro games, and I would say that it isn't really a problem outside of fighting games where it's a bit more difficult to get off some combos because of the lack of practice that I've had with a D-pad of this style that uses conductive rubber pads. This seems to be styled after an Xbox controller, but the biggest difference is that the Xbox controller uses dome switches and not conductive rubber. And I think that probably would have worked a bit better on this new device since it is supposed to mirror a console controller as a streaming handheld. I think if you're new to making handhelds and you don't have any hardcore gamers on your team, it is easier to make a controller with dome switches that work well for most people than it is to make one with conductive rubber, since it is so easy to overshoot or undershoot the stiffness of the rubber that you use. This doesn't suffer from any problems where it can bottom out when you press in the center, and if I press directly in the center, there is no input. If I wanted to get a diagonal, you can see it's just about where you press, and again, this is going to take a few hours or so to get used to at first. The funny thing is, I wanted to show that this wasn't that good for fighting games because I was originally having issues getting combos off when I first opened up the box, but I ended up having no issues at all coming back to film this after a full day of use. So I'm having to throw that conclusion out the window, given how easy it was for me to do this in the video that you're watching now. Moving on, if we look at the analog sticks, we can see that these have about a 10 to 20% dead zone in all directions, which is not the end of the world, but it is something worth mentioning. If I had to guess, they probably want this to combat wear and tear that would eventually result in drifting. On Chinese handhelds that are easier to service with off-the-shelf replacement parts, this is less of an issue, but since this is harder to open, they probably felt like this was their best option. In practice, this hasn't really caused any issues for me because you are still able to get the full range of input that you need for games that have variable movement speeds. This dead zone is not nearly big enough to stop you from being able to walk slowly in games or get to a running speed as you push the stick further out. Now, what they should do in software is allow users to customize this dead zone setting like you can on Udon and other handhelds. This would allow power users to fine-tune the setting to their liking and also provide a way for everyone to increase their dead zone setting in the future if they were to experience drifting issues. But again, when it comes to me and all of the games that I tested in this video, this has had no impact on my play. When it comes to the ergonomics of this device, I think Logitech did a decent job. This rounded edge here goes directly into the palm of your hand with no problems, and it is comfortable to hold, even though it is a larger device. It is very light for its size, and you should not have any issues playing this occasionally with one hand on either end. The joystick caps are also comfortable, and I like that they are not easy to damage or get dirty during use. If you've used a Steam Deck before, you know that's not something that can be said for that device. Considering that this is a streaming device, you'll be happy to know that this screen is the star of the show, and it is without a doubt one of the best aspects of this handheld. If we look at the display characteristics on screen now, we can see that this thing has a pretty solid color accuracy of 94.6% of the sRGB color space. This is a vast improvement over the 70.9% that I benchmarked on my Steam Deck, and it is something that I could tell even without these graphs. Our peak brightness comes in at 493 nits, which is a bit lower than the 550 that we can get with the Steam Deck, but our contrast ratio of 1500 to 1 is a significant improvement over the 1000 to 1 on the Steam Deck. This means that you're going to get deeper blacks and a greater variation between the darker elements on the screen and the brighter ones. This is also something that was extremely obvious to me while using this device. When it comes to color temperature, there isn't a big difference between these two handhelds, and both are around 7500 Kelvin, which is the setting that I tend to prefer on handhelds of this size and nature. As you can see, this screen is a beast, and that was a surprise. As I've said before, the screen is one of the weakest aspects of the Steam Deck, but is one of the best parts of this new Logitech device. It's kind of disappointing that Logitech was able to secure this superior 7-inch screen when Valve did not, and I wonder if there's a big cost difference between these two panels, because this is the screen that Valve should have used. I think the video footage that you will see later in this video will speak for itself. As it stands right now, this screen is my favorite part of this new product. Before we look at the gaming performance, I do just want to give you a quick look at the software situation right now so we can hopefully point out some of the shortcomings of this device and some things that Logitech might improve on in the future. When you get this out of the box, you are going to be inside this launcher view, but it won't have these apps installed. This is their gaming UI, and it will predominantly have streaming apps ready to go. I think if you're coming from a console and you've never used an Android device like this, it's going to be very easy for you to pick up and play with the cloud. Since this is a streaming device and it does streaming very well, it is going to be easy for novices or people that are new to Android to be able to get in and out and get on with their life. This has a lot of shortcomings if you want a better experience or you are a power user, and that would be a problem if you were locked into this UI. And there are other handhelds in the market where you were locked into their gaming UI and you couldn't get out of it. Thankfully, that is not the case with this device. So as you can see, we have all of our apps here, and if I go into the All Apps menu, I can see a collection of stuff that I've installed on my device. Now outside of this, you've got a couple of things at the top. You've got an account and you have messages. Here, they put some of the system notifications, but they also have a place for announcements from Logitech, and I think that's a cool feature that is not being utilized by other handhelds in the market right now. You can also update the device, and I did have one security update available to install since I opened the device. One of the questions that I had for this company on this topic was whether or not they were going to commit to doing software updates for a set period of time. For example, Nokia will promise to support their phones with security updates for a few years or so, and Logitech did not make that kind of commitment yet. And I think if they did, then this would be, in a league of its own compared to other device manufacturers that don't even update their software at all, let alone provide any of the Google security updates that are easier to push out. So I'm hoping that this is the first product that does that, but that remains to be seen. You also have an album for screenshots, and I did make a bunch of these on accident because the start and select are set to this by default, and it is a bit annoying. I'm afraid to look, but I think I probably have hundreds of screenshots by now. But for the most part, what we want to do is come over here to the settings menu. Inside the settings menu, we can do a bunch of things, but the thing that we care the most about is getting into the tablet mode. Beyond being better for power users, the biggest reason to use the tablet mode is so that you can use more than one application at one time. I have seen someone incorrectly state that the gaming UI doesn't actually close out of applications because they are still visible in the task view. This is incorrect, and it is also not how Android works. I can easily show you that the gaming UI does close out of applications after you switch to a new app. Here we have two emulators up and running at one time. We have Mupen64 playing The Legend of Zelda, and we have RA playing Donkey Kong Land. They are both running at the same time, and I can switch between them using the task view. Now, let's go into the handheld mode, and you will see that the system knows that Mupen is currently running because it is on the leftmost corner of the screen. I can press on that, and I will be back inside that game once again. If I press the home button and go back into the main menu and then switch to RA, it will tell me that it will close Mupen and open up the new emulator. Hitting confirm opens up RA, which was already opened before. If I now go into tablet mode and I open up the task view, I can see that Mupen64 shows that it is running The Legend of Zelda, but this is not accurate. This process has been killed from the handheld mode. This is just how Android works. Just because something shows up in this task view does not mean that it is still running. All that being said, I never use the gaming UI because it's quite limited in what it can do at this point. This tablet mode is much better, and it supports gesture controls by default, which is how things should be. Some companies use software controls on devices like this, but that is kind of stupid since you lose a lot of your screen real estate. Outside of that, you just have your standard Android system where you can go into the Google Play Store and install whatever apps you want. I haven't made any big changes here outside of changing the DPI setting to make the icons look smaller. I think it just fits the screen a bit better, and I like having a bit of extra space for the system. I think if this can get an Android 12 release in the future, it will be nice to have the menu bar on the bottom. The final point that I want to go over before we look at the gaming performance on this device is that this does not come with any screen mapping technology, and that is one of the biggest negatives that I have for this device. Logitech might state that this is a streaming device, so that was not one of their concerns, but I think that that is a cop-out. Logitech partnered with Tencent to release this device, and I still do not have any idea what Tencent did to support this product or what their involvement in it was. Logitech also did not have an answer for me when I asked. What I do know is that Tencent is one of the biggest Android game publishers out there today, and I know that they created their own Android emulator to play their own games with screen mapping controls because they know that people want that kind of thing. So I cannot for the life of me understand why they would not think to add the screen mapping technology that they already know how to create on an Android handheld that they partnered to create. It comes across as lazy, and it puts the cloud at a severe handicap compared to cheaper products in the market that have this functionality already. There are apps that you can use to gain screen mapping functionality if you want, as you can see now, but they are not free, and I don't think that you should have to pay for them for a device that is already this expensive. For the time being, you can play Android games that support native controls, but the problem is that there are not many games that can be played with controller at this point, and most of the popular ones are limited to only supporting touch controls. When it comes to the stated purpose of this device, I would say that it does an exceptional job. I had no issues with Xbox Game Cloud, and I did not do this thing any favors. The footage that you're looking at right now was with the device connected to a slow 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi signal on top of having the signal routed through a US VPN. Even with these two negatives, the performance was still very good, and I can see people enjoying this product even if they never wanted to do anything more than just stream games on services like this. But we care the most about emulation, and this device should be fairly capable for most systems that are supported on Android, even though it does have an older mid-range processor. When it comes to older retro titles, you are going to have more than enough power to tackle these games, but there are cheaper options that can do the same thing. The only real benefit of playing these games on a device like the cloud is that the screen is as good as it is. We have a 16:9 display, so a lot of these older systems will have black bars, but there are a few games that support widescreen modes very well, like this Super Mario World game for example. Other SNES games run without issues. When it comes to N64, I had to use the standalone emulator to get good performance because RA was having issues with these titles running at even 720p resolution. This is not something that I would expect from a 720G, and I think it would indicate that this device is not using the full potential of the processor. Switching gears over to Sega, we don't have any issues with Genesis, and we also have the ability to play some of these games in 16:9 resolution to take advantage of our good screen. If you're into Sega Saturn, that also runs very well on this device. Sega Dreamcast is the first system that I played that ran worse than I expected. For these first few titles, I didn't have any issues, and even Sega Rally 2 ran well. When I went to test Sonic Adventure 2, I started to notice that the system was lagging in parts of the game that are not more demanding to emulate versus other scenes that ran without issues. I took a look at the clock speeds of our CPU cores while the game was lagging and saw that our big cores are doing no work in these situations, which is giving us less performance than we should have. I've seen issues like this on other handhelds that I've reviewed, and I would guess that the thermal engine is incorrectly configured right now because this type of behavior is not normal. Not all Dreamcast games had this issue during my testing, but I did want to point it out, and I think it might come up again as we test more systems. Moving over to PlayStation with the PS1, and we are getting great performance on these titles with widescreen hacks and PGXP enabled. PSP also runs very well in this system, and I think we might be able to get a bit of extra performance out of this with custom CPU controls. When it comes to 3DS, I got decent performance with Mario Kart set to 1x resolution, so I was hopeful that other games would run well, but that doesn't seem to be the case. On Ultra Moon, I experienced a lot of stuttering and slowdown, but I did notice that our CPU and GPU were almost asleep, so this should see a massive improvement if we were able to manually adjust the CPU and GPU clocks. Now let's take a look at GameCube emulation. When it comes to this system, the performance was about where I expected it to be, but I did experience occasional stuttering here and there that should not have happened on a processor that is this powerful. I also had good performance when it comes to Wii emulation, but it did experience occasional stuttering here and there. Even though I ran these games in native resolution, I was happy with the PS2 performance that I was able to get from this device. This emulator gave me the least amount of issues from any in this video, and the 720G should be able to play a lot of PS2 games at native resolution based on my tests. Our last system is Switch, and I want to point out that this device should be capable of a lot more than I'm able to show at this point. Based on other systems in this video, our processor is not being fully utilized, and based on my experience, this game would run near full speed if it were. That being said, we can still play a few 2D Switch games on this device, which is nice. Let's wrap up this video with my pros and cons of the Logitech G Cloud. When it comes to the pros, the highest thing on my list is the screen. This panel is irrefutably better than the panels used in other products that this thing competes with. The color accuracy is higher, the screen brightness is near the top in this market, and the contrast ratio is also quite good. The build quality of this device is also a strong point, as is the ergonomics. The joysticks are also nice, and I'm a fan of the rubber top that was used. I also think the battery life is very good on this device. Finally, the sound quality of this device exceeded my expectations. When it comes to cons, there are a few things that I do not like. I am not the biggest fan of the difference in the rubber stiffness between the D-pad and the ABXY buttons, and I also do not like the shape of the R2 and L2 buttons. Even though this is a streaming device, not having video out support is a big goof on Logitech's part, given that there are a lot of cheaper products out there that at least have HDMI video out. They could have implemented this on the 720G if they wanted. Having the only configuration of this set at 64 gigabytes of internal storage with 4 gigabytes of RAM is a bit of a joke, and you will find that you are not able to install that many games on this device before all of your storage is used up. This issue is compounded by the fact that this device does not support an exFAT file system for SD cards, so you will be forced to place your larger ROMs on your limited internal storage if you want to play them. The software is also not as polished as it should be in a retail product, and even though it is doing a better job than some of the Chinese handhelds out there today, some of the omissions, like not having screen mapping software, are kind of laughable for the reasons that I already stated earlier in this video. Finally, the price is a huge con for me. I know that it is currently fashionable to bash this device because it is listed as a streaming handheld with a price tag that is this high, and I'm not here to defend it. I know almost all of the costs associated with producing one of these devices, and $350 as a selling price is far too high for what is on offer. That is not even taking into account that all 3 Udon versions are cheaper than this while being significantly more capable in terms of game streaming, Android gaming, and emulation. There's also the elephant in the room where this is $50 from the base Steam Deck, all while being significantly worse in most aspects except for battery life and screen quality. That being said, just because something is close to the Steam Deck in price while being weaker does not on its own make it bad. There are other products on the market that I would consider to be e-waste near or above the price of the Steam Deck that never get called out as such on YouTube. In my opinion, this thing should have gone for $250 to $275 max. That feels like a good price for this given what I've experienced in my test to make this video, and that is readily available from a reputable company with a solid warranty and retail store access. It's no doubt expensive, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like other companies in China wouldn't get a free pass from reviewers if they tried to sell a 720G handheld like this for over $300 if they could get this chip. Let's call a spade a spade. I would say that this is a far better deal, even at the high price of $350 for what you get and what this can do, than the RG552 was for the $230 that it sold for a few months ago, or the $200 that it sells for right now. Anyway, that's my take on the Logitech G Cloud. If you see this within the $250 to $275 price range in the future, it is an easy recommendation from me. As always, if you enjoyed this review, a sub would be massively appreciated. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.